Welcome back everyone, it's Charlie. This will be my full video for Marvel's Werewolf by Night. There's a whole bunch of Easter eggs and references, so we'll break it all down. I'll also explain how he fits into the larger MCU, like how this is connected to all the other movies, Marvel Phase 5 stuff that's happening. Because it is Marvel's first time doing this special presentation that they call. It's sort of like a one-off, like a short movie or a really long episode of television, instead of doing like a traditional series with a bunch of episodes or doing like a full 2-hour plus movie. But it is meant to be Marvel's first legit horror project and their first monster-based project. Like we have the Blade movie with Mahershala Ali coming up. We'll start seeing more monster characters like this in the MCU. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos, and careful for spoilers from the special if you haven't seen it yet. We'll start at the beginning, work our way through shot by shot, talking about Easter eggs and WTF moments as we go along. But the Werewolf by Night is Jack Russell. That's his name inside the MCU as a human. He's played by Gael Garcia Bernal. Amazingly, I thought he did a great job. Pretty much everybody in this special knew the assignment. They kind of knew the vibe and the tone that they were going for. Michael Giacchino directed it and he did the music for it. He's traditionally known as the person who does music for a lot of the big Marvel, Disney, other related films. His powers are basically a normal werewolf's powers. I'll explain his origin story too, but the cool connection to Moon Knight is that Moon Knight as a character originally debuted in the Werewolf by Night comic book. The main reason why he didn't appear for the first time in the Moon Knight series is just because they were saving him for this particular special, and because the tone, the feel of this was so different from Moon Knight. Moon Knight was much more of a traditional Marvel series. This is meant to be more of an homage to the classic Universal monster movies like Werewolf of London, The Thing from the Black Lagoon, Dracula, Frankenstein, all the stuff like that. That's why it felt like they were doing a 1930s movie as if it were happening in the 1930s, but with modern technology. The obvious connection to the larger MCU is stuff like the Blade movie, more supernatural characters teaming up eventually. They also kind of tease that during this episode too, like Elsa Bloodstone comes from this famous family of hunters. He comes from a family of monsters, but they find a way to work together. They imply that they will eventually team up more in the future. Obviously, another big introduction during this series is the Man-Thing character in the MCU. The funny thing is, there was actually a Man-Thing movie that was done in the pre-MCU days, like before Marvel Studios really started making its own projects. We'll see if he comes back during the Blade movie. I believe there'll be a connection to the Kit Harington Black Knight character, like Black Knight Vampire Hunter, and that's why Blade showed up in his post-credit scene. This is also the path to them explaining how characters like Ghost Rider can exist in this universe, just generally supernatural, monster-based characters like you'd expect. The special Marvel intro for the Marvel presentation that they do that's in color at the beginning of the episode, I think that they're just going to use before all the other similar types of one-off specials that they do, and they did tease that they would do more projects like this. Now obviously each one would have its own separate tone, so like some of them will feel like more traditional modern Marvel films, and the style of some of the other ones might be a little bit weirder, kind of like this one. A lot of this is also just having fun, trying experiments with different types of movies and projects inside the MCU. Like, even though they all feel like very different types of projects from different places, they're all taking place inside the MCU. They have that really cool special intro scene where they interrupt the traditional Marvel Studios intro with the werewolf slashing through the screen with its claws and changing to black and white to set the whole tone for the monster movie 1930s classic vibe. Also, the music and the audio takes on a very 1930s quality too, like the singing that happens across the Marvel credits once it goes to black and white is done in the same style as it would have been if it had happened in the 1930s. But the stuff that they're saying here when they're chanting and singing during this part of the intro is the exact same thing that they're saying during the traditional Marvel Studios intro. Another really cool homage to classic film is the Wizard of Oz Easter egg. There are a couple in the episode. At the beginning when they change from color to black and white, and then at the end when they change from black and white to color, that happens during The Wizard of Oz because it was one of the very first color films that was released. At the time, most of the films that had been released were all black and white, so color was like a brand new thing. So during that movie, they wanted to ease the transition for a lot of audiences around the country that were seeing color films for the first time. They also play Somewhere Over the Rainbow, the song from Wizard of Oz, at the end of the episode. And you'll also notice throughout the episode, the only color comes from the Bloodstone itself, like the ruby slippers in Wizard of Oz. The whole thing with the Bloodstone itself is that it's meant to be a fragment of a mystery meteorite that crashed to Earth in ancient times, the same way the vibranium meteorite crashed to Earth. The lightning cracking across the logo here is a reference to the Frankenstein movie, like I said, another classic Universal monster movie. The opening scene narration is meant to tell you where this takes place, when it takes place in the timeline after Avengers Endgame, like the Avengers already exist. When it mentions the known universe, that's a reference to the monsters and other supernatural characters we haven't seen a lot of in the MCU until now. So they reference things like vampires before in the MCU and the Thor movies, but until recently we hadn't really seen any. Even Mahershala Ali's Blade character that debuted during the Eternals post-credit scene was off-screen, like we didn't see him. When the voiceover is referencing the Avengers, it calls them Marvels for Marvel Comics, Marvel Studios. This is a vampire. The cycles of the moon next to it are a reference to werewolves, also technically a reference to Khonshu and Moon Knight, which itself has a big link to the Werewolf by Night character. Moon Knight himself didn't appear during the episode, and supposedly Blade was also supposed to have a cameo, but there was some scheduling issue that kept him out of it. There were a couple references to Blade during the special. I'll talk about those when we get to those part of the episode. Some of the monsters weren't totally clear, but they're all meant to be canonical Marvel comic book monsters. So if you are a big fan of those monster Marvel comic books, you probably recognize a lot of these. I think this one is meant to be an Atlantean or connected to Atlantis in the MCU, which in the MCU is going to be featured in Black Panther Wakanda Forever, but in the MCU they're changing the backstory a little bit and they're calling it Talocan, and it's a city underwater. It and Namor's character are based more on Aztec and Mayan culture mythology. The Trident is meant to be another reference to Namor, who we'll also see during Black Panther Wakanda Forever, like I just did a trailer video for that. The man with the bow is an old-timey Hawkeye reference, but also the creature is a werewolf, and it's meant to be a reference to the ancient hunters in Elsa Bloodstone's family, like this ancient line of hunters. The whole idea is that their family founded this order of hunters dedicating to eradicating all types of monsters in the MCU, but I think the idea with Elsa is that, like Jack Russell, they both only hunt the bad monsters. They spend a lot of the time in the episode with them together trying to humanize monsters just in general so that you sympathize more with them by the end. This is a reference to the ancient Bloodstone family using their trademark Bloodstone gem to fight Bigfoot. That's right, Bigfoot is canon to the MCU now, and his head is mounted on the wall. R.I.P. Bigfoot. In the comics, the Bloodstone basically has all the same powers that they talk about during the episode, like it gives you a form of invincibility, enhanced strength, speed, protection, regeneration, telepathic powers. It even extends your lifespan too, which they reference a lot when talking about her father. Her father, Ulysses Bloodstone, lived for an extremely long time because of it, and that's why he looks kind of like Frankenstein's monster at the end of the episode, because he's ancient. Also, because of the classic monster movie vibe of the entire special, they are literally trying to make a Frankenstein reference because he has stitches all over his head. I guess you could also make a Tales from the Crypt Keeper reference because he has this animatronic thing going on with his corpse. The reason this character looks kind of like Conan, though, is because the Bloodstone comes from the Hyborian Age comics, which is where the Conan character comes from. Marvel doesn't have the rights to all the Conan stuff, but for a long time they did publish the Conan comics. This medieval reference looks like a version of Camelot in the MCU, like the Eternals movie canonized Camelot, King Arthur, Excalibur, Merlin in the MCU. That would have been around this same period in MCU history. The events of the episode basically cover the death of Ulysses Bloodstone and the ceremony that they hold to select the next wielder of the Bloodstone and leader of their family. In the comics, the next wielder was his daughter Elsa, and that's basically the way things play out in the episode, like she winds up getting the Bloodstone by the end and taking control of the family. The special monster hunting contest that they hold for the Bloodstone, though, is to find and kill Man-Thing. Like, whoever finds him and takes the Bloodstone from him, also implying that they kill Man-Thing, winds up winning. The whole reason why Jack Russell is here in the first place, though, is because he's trying to save his friend, Ted Sallis, which is why he calls Man-Thing Ted. That's his original name when he was still human. Man-Thing is sort of like Marvel's version of Swamp Thing, but I believe that he actually debuted before the Swamp Thing comic book debuted, so technically he came first, even though I think that Alan Moore developed the concept of Swamp Thing before Man-Thing. It's just that Marvel was able to get Man-Thing out on shelves before they got Swamp Thing out. He has a very super soldier type of backstory. The whole idea is that he was working as a scientist with AIM. They were trying to recreate the super soldier serum, so he developed a special concoction and wound up taking it and crashing into a mystical swamp, and that's how he got his powers, transforming into what you see here. He looks pretty accurate to the comics. One of the big changes, though, from Swamp Thing is that he has a lot of multiverse-based powers. Like, he has crazy powers. The whole thing with him burning people is that he's actually attracted to fear, and he'll burn anyone who is afraid of him, which is why he keeps telling Elsa when she approaches him to treat him like an old friend and call him by name, like, "Hey Ted, that's a great name. You seem pretty cool." So she doesn't get burned, but everybody else who's terrified of him gets burned. He can fly, he can control plant life, obviously. He can also teleport, which they referenced during the episode too. Like, Jack Russell tells him, "Oh, the Bloodstone is weakening your powers. You can't escape on your own." Otherwise, he would just teleport on his own and save himself. It's also how they escape at the end with the record player that's playing a version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, because Man-Thing apparently just really liked it and teleported it with them. They also implied that Werewolf by Night and Man-Thing have been friends for a long time, having adventures for a long time, because they have that funny argument at the end where they joke about who saves the other one the most. Like, this type of thing has happened to them a lot. And also, when he's talking to Elsa during the episode, he says that he's a hunter, but not that kind of hunter, which is just a reference to him hunting all the bad monsters. Kind of in the way that Blade kills vampires, but mostly just the bad vampires. The problem is that most vampires are bad, so that's why it seems like Blade kills all vampires. And even though there's the pop culture connection between werewolves and vampires, Werewolf by Night's backstory actually comes from Dracula. When he starts talking about his complicated quote-unquote family, he's referencing his origin story. Originally, his grandfather was fighting Dracula, and one of the werewolves that Dracula was keeping captive bit his grandfather, and then the curse was passed down through his family line. When he was younger, most of his family wound up dying, so nobody was actually able to teach him about being a werewolf, so when he reached the age of maturity and transformed for the first time, he had no idea what was going on, but eventually chose to use his powers for good. The murals on the walls when he walks in for the first time tell the history of the Bloodstone family fighting monsters across history since ancient times. This guy actually looks just like the comic book version of Gore the God Butcher with the head tails. This is meant to be a werewolf, foreshadowing Jack Russell transforming into his werewolf form. The main room here is filled with all kinds of Easter eggs for Marvel comic book monsters. If you think you recognize some of these ones in the background, let me know in the comments what you think they are. I think that most of them are meant to be references to specific Marvel monsters. The guards working here look just like TVA agents, but they might just be reusing some of the TVA props. The painting next to the casket is of young Ulysses Bloodstone with the Bloodstone embedded in his chest, which is meant to be sort of an homage to the comic book art. That's basically how the Bloodstone works in the comics. That's why in the end credits you see Elsa with the Bloodstone looking like it's in her chest now. The woman here playing his widow is Elsa's stepmother. They don't really explain what happened to her biological mother, but the way they talk about her, it sounds like she died under mysterious circumstances. Maybe they'll get into that in a future project, because it sounds like Elsa is going to come back just like Werewolf is coming back. The stepmother's name is Verussa Bloodstone. I don't think she's from the comics. I think they just created her for the special here, but she's basically meant to be the main villain of this series. And I believe all the hunters that they have here too, like the other side characters, are brand new to the episode. I couldn't find any specific comic book references to them. When he claims he fought the vampire on the wall here a few times, I don't think this is directly meant to be Dracula. I think he's just like another major vampire lord from the comics. There was a rumor that Dracula was going to be the main villain in the MCU Blade movie with Mahershala Ali, but I think that they've actually decided to completely change the plot of that film and they're just rewriting the whole script. Dracula is an MCU character. You see him in all the Moon Knight memes. Dracula better have my money. This out of the whole contest with Man-Thing and the Bloodstone, I've already explained his backstory, his connection to Werewolf by Night in the MCU. It also sounds like Man-Thing will come back in future projects too, like he's just a cool dude who shows up and teleports you away and helps you out when you need him. I believe the skull that they use here at the beginning of the contest is meant to be a vampire skull. And obviously the first time Jack Russell meets Elsa in the maze here, they want to foreshadow them eventually working together. Like, okay, you help me, I'll help you. But then it turns into something bigger. Like she starts to sympathize with him and the other monsters, the good monsters. When she's fighting this other hunter, this actually looks kind of like a Black Widow leg move. There's a lot of really quick blink and you'll miss it references to old school films too. Like you'll see blood splatter on the frame, or you'll see the cigarette burns where they're changing reels as if they were changing reels. Even though all Marvel's modern projects are filmed digitally, not on actual film, they made it look like it was on actual film. This is just meant to be their family's tomb. They have bodies going back centuries. Obviously, the Bloodstone gives them extended lifespans. That's why some of the dates seem kind of weird, like her aunt died in 1922. Like, wow, that seems like a long time ago. Some of the names, though, on the gravestones are names of real-life Marvel crew members working on the movies and the Disney Plus series. When he says he understands what it's like to grow up in a complicated family, that's a reference to his origin story in the way that he found out that he was a werewolf, and obviously her backstory with her family of hunters. When she makes the joke about her aunt being convinced that she was going to come back from the dead, that's a Marvel Zombies reference, but they also explored that concept in Moon Knight. Another Werewolf by Night connection, obviously, when they clarified how the MCU afterlife worked. You can actually come back from the dead. The afterlife is just a series of alternate dimensions that your consciousness goes to depending on your belief system or whether or not you form contracts with higher level beings. Also in the end credits, you actually see a scene of her hand breaking out of her tomb, so it's like them paying off that reference, like, oh, she actually did come back to life. When he tries to reach for the Bloodstone, it winds up hurting him because he is a monster. It hurts all monsters, not just werewolves. Then when they're trapped in the cage together, he implies he still doesn't have total control over himself when he's in werewolf form, kind of like the Hulk was before he learned to merge his two halves into the Professor Banner form. So I think that also might wind up happening to his character in the future. Like he'll find a way to retain his intelligence when he's in werewolf form. When he starts smelling her, trying to remember her when he changes form, and he says that it's worked once before. That's a reference to the comic books when he made a promise to his mother about not killing his stepfather, who he was able to remember in werewolf form. I really love the way they filmed the reveal scene too, just like the film technique of them actually filming him transforming and showing his face full on for the first time. Also, when he's ripping all these people to shreds, they splash blood on the screen like you would see in an old-timey horror movie. I think this is actually the bloodiest thing that Marvel has done so far if you don't count the original Blade movies, which were technically not MCU movies. Like that was pre-Marvel Studios days before they started making their own movies. You also notice Elsa uses Jack Russell's advice about dealing with Man-Thing, treating him as a friend when she tries to approach him in werewolf form, which winds up working, like he winds up remembering her. Deus Ex Man-Thing winds up showing up to hilariously kill her stepmother because she was afraid of him. Remember, it's mostly a fear-based thing. And I love this joke between the two of them after the fact too. Like he just asks where Jack Russell went and she points him on his way like it's no big deal. Like, oh, thanks so much for killing my awful stepmother. She takes over her family's house, and if it wasn't clear, she's going to continue being a hunter. It's just that she's only going to be hunting bad monsters like Jack Russell, using his powers for good. They reference Wizard of Oz again when it changes from color to black and white and start using the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Also, the song itself, like the lyrics of the song, are a reference to both of them kind of longing for a better place, like somewhere over the rainbow where things aren't quite so crazy like this. And they reveal that Man-Thing teleported both of them to safety. The reason why they have that same record player from earlier means that Man-Thing stole it from the maze just because he liked it. And they joke just chilling out like a couple old friends, like two dudes who do stuff like this all the time. A werewolf and a giant multiversal teleporting swamp creature having coffee together and going to get sushi. They joke about who saves each other more, implying that they do this all the time. You also notice that they teleported an old school pay telephone and a guitar. I think the joke here is that the telephone was just something that Jack Russell was holding when Man-Thing teleported him, like it got teleported with him on accident. The reason why he doesn't want to think about eating food at the moment is because he literally just got done eating a bunch of humans. Also, sushi is raw fish. He just got done eating a bunch of raw humans. During the end credits, the red light is meant to be a reference to the Bloodstone, the other artifacts from the episode. They depict different scenes from the episode, also paying off a couple references too. Like there's a depiction of Elsa's aunt actually coming back to life, breaking out of her grave. The heads on the pikes are just meant to be monsters from their previous kills, and also comic book Marvel monsters. If you think you recognize which ones they are a reference to, post it in the comments below. You also see the Bloodstone in Elsa's chest, like her father's, which is basically how it works in the comics. Overall, it was a great special. I love the way they played this. I love that they're doing more horror stuff in the MCU. What'll probably happen though is that when they bring Werewolf by Night and Elsa back in future crossovers with darker supernatural characters, is that the tone, the vibe will be very different, more like traditional Marvel series. Maybe they'll come back during the Blade movie, we'll see. Remember, this is only a one-off, so like there's no episode 2 or anything like that, but if you spotted any other Easter eggs and references in the episode that I didn't talk about in the video, just write them below in the comments. Everyone click here for my Deadpool 3 Wolverine trailer video, and click here for my House of the Dragon episode 8 video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.